Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. It's our 200th episode. So to celebrate, we've taken the survey results that you contributed to over the course of a month, and we've used that to help create a list of the top 10 game soundtracks from the 2010s. 200 episodes of Original Soundchat. Joe, I didn't think we'd make it this far. Heck, of all the shows we've done over the course of 10 to 15 years, none of our shows have ever made it to this kind of number of episodes, so this is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, this is a new one for me, and also the fact that we have shown no sign of slowing down is also, I think, pretty cool and impressive. So happy 200th episode, Peter.
Go us! Happy 200th. It's interesting that it falls on Thanksgiving week here in the United States, and usually in the past years of the show, that's been our question and answer session episode where we kind of take it easy and field some Q&As that we get from the fans. We'll have a little bit of that at the end of this episode, but what are we doing for this one, Joe? Like we've crafted this top 10 list of best of 2010s, but how did we get there?
So at the start of October, essentially, we started putting out surveys for, basically they were just big lists of basically every big release in a year. So there was one for 2010, then 2011, 2012, all the way up to 2019. And we asked people to, hey, pick your 5 favorite soundtracks off of this list. And then we took the top 5 from each one, and we grouped them together by 5 years, so 2010 to 2014, and then 2015 to 2019. And we put those all against each other, and then we took the top 10 from both of those, which gave us a pool of 20 games to work with that we had to then make our top 10 out of. So it is a bit of a weird top 10, because it was not made the way we usually do our top 10s, where everything is in one pool and we pick from there. Because that's a lot of games. That's 10 years worth of video games, and it turns out a lot of games can come out in the span of 10 years. So it's a little weird. We did it kind of battle royale style almost, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Again, thank you folks for taking part in that, and I think this is a fun top 10 list in general.
It really is, and yeah, we couldn't have done it without your help. The finishing touches on it all was that both Joe and I made top 10 lists that were informed but not dictated by the results that we got. And so we kind of made our own personal top 10 lists from all of those games, the 20 there. And wow, it was interesting to see the results we had, because then we had to synthesize a top 10 list as we'd normally do for a best of list. And I think it turned out pretty good.
We have done an episode on literally every single game that we will talk about today.
I think that's pretty impressive. We've picked some good games over the years.
So if you want more detail on literally any of these games, there's an Original Soundchat episode for you.
Yeah, we go into not only the 5 critical tracks, we've got some on the cutting room floor. We talk about the development history, the composers behind the games, like what's their history, what have they worked on. So full fleshing out there, and that's really important. Thank you for bringing that up, because interesting how that all shakes out. Every game that we'll bring up here has an episode covered on it.
Yeah, I expected at least one to not, and no, like even the honorable mentions, all of them. It's pretty neat. So let's jump into number 10. Number 10 for the best of 2010s is Nier. Talked about in episode 117 of Original Soundchat. The composers that worked on this game are Keiichi Okabe, Kakeru Ishihama, Keigo Hoashi, and Takafumi Nishimura. So those 5 tracks: here. Let's get into them straight in. For people that have never listened to a top 10 of ours before, we don't really discuss a ton. We have a little bit of discussion at the end, but this is mostly, we're going to go through the tracks, talk a little bit about the game, a slight bit, and then just move on and keep it moving. This is a lot of clips we got to get through. So, critical track number 1 for Nier is Hills of Radiant Winds. Track number 2 is Cold Steel Coffin. Coming in at number 3, we have Kaine Escape. Number 4 is Song of the Ancients, Fate. And rounding out the tracks for Nier is Ashes of Dreams, New.
I think it says a lot that often when people talk about best game soundtracks ever, Nier is regularly on that list.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's here at number 10 means that there was some amazing video game music that released over the last decade.
Oh yeah, Nier is probably among my favorite soundtracks on this list, which is saying something because, like you said, there's some good stuff on here. But just something, Emmy Evans's vocals like make every single one of these songs stand out, essentially, except for Cold Steel Coffin, which she does not sing in. I don't know who sings in it, but I don't think it's her. There's no soundtrack that really sounds like Nier, except for the other Nier game. And I think that's neat and a really cool thing to look at when you look at games like this.
When it's singing in a language that they've also made up for the game, I think that's also a really cool thing. A lot of beautiful music in the Nier soundtrack. And it is tough to see it here, to be honest.
But it's good that it's here in the first place.
Yes, I am glad that it made the cut. That's for sure. And you can listen to our original Soundchat episode on Nier, and that was episode 117. Coming in at number 9 on the Best of 2010s is Undertale, with music by Toby Fox. The critical 5 tracks for Undertale. The first one is Bone Trousel. After that, it's Death by Glamour. The next track is Battle Against a True Hero. Following that, it's Hopes and Dreams. And rounding things out, it has to be Megalovania.
It's really interesting that we are now talking about Megalovania again, considering this year, during the best of 2022, we will likely be talking about the song that inspired it again.
Mm-hmm.
Because Live Alive, Megalomania, like, that's one of my favorite soundtracks of the year so far, for sure. But, like, yeah, Undertale is a bona fide classic, and it's a soundtrack that I think people are going to be talking about for years to come still.
If you told me a few years ago, I would have thought, Undertale was clearly one of the best game soundtracks, at least of the last decade. But then when you start piecing it together, it was interesting to kind of place it out and see where it fell. I'm really glad it's here. Toby Fox did a magnificent job of really playing off of the strength of leitmotifs throughout the game and having these themes represent different characters and bringing it throughout all the different tracks and having it mean different things. But not only that, then he programs the game, he writes the game. It's a brilliant indie title from 2015. And just you hear the diversity of music, even in the Critical 5 alone, and that's just a smattering from Undertale. It's so good.
And it got into Smash.
Yeah.
Megalovania got a remix in Smash.
I think, for it to catch the attention of Masahiro Sakurai. And now Toby Fox is basically picking up his Famitsu column space. It's an interesting passing of the guard there.
And he's working on Pokemon, too.
Right?
Like, regularly.
So we'll probably bring his name up again in Best of 2022, and that's wild. You can learn more about Undertale on episode 24 of Original Soundchat.
Number 8 is one of my personal favorite soundtracks of the decade. This is Killer Instinct, with music by Mick Gordon, Atlas Plug, and Cell Dweller. And God, I love this soundtrack. First track we're going to highlight is The Instinct.
Killer Instinct.
From there, we'll get a little faster and get into Type 03. Number 3 is the hypest song to ever be. It's I'm Back to Rise.
Jab, hook, uppercut, for my flow when it impacts up your gut. You wanna try to beat the champ, you ain't tough enough. I think you move through your best and I counter punch. Man, I fake for position, ain't hitting for your brain. Cause I train with the wisdom, gain vision through the pain. I will bang through the system, stay vicious in the game. And I'm back forever, you can't stop my reign. I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to. Let the truth be told, I feel on fire when my passion flow. I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to. Let the truth be told, I feel on fire when my passion flows. Put 'em up, show me what you got. I wanna see how you rock, if you're great or not. Wanna take my spot, better train the box. I put the game on lock and my ring won't stop. I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to, I'm back to. Let the truth be told, I feel on.
Number 4 turns up the heat with Inferno. And number 5, this is Nocturne in Blood.
You're 100% right. I'm Back to Rise is super, super hype. I'm also glad that we got to include the Season 3 tracks in there. Nocturne in Blood, a great example of that. Just a great full package. And wow, I mean, for Mick Gordon to really carry those first 2 seasons and then Atlas Plug and Cell Dweller to kind of round it out, just makes a really complete package for a fighting game at the launch of Xbox One that there was some anticipation for, you know, more that it was coming back after so long, but then did it launch the right way with how it was structured, with, you know, the how you got characters and all that, but to deliver on the soundtrack front completely. I mean, so many good tracks here, and it was tough to honestly pick 5.
And it's also just a really cool game to watch.
Yeah.
I watched a couple of Evos when it was there, and it's really, really fun. And there's just a lot of variation on this soundtrack. There's a few pieces of like metal on this Critical 5 that we've put together, but there's also like Back to Rise, which is this super hype rap. And then you've got Lycanthropy, which is an orchestral weird chain piece. And Village of Whispers, which is kind of metal, but like J-metal. It's really, really, it's a really neat soundtrack overall. There might be a few weaker tracks somewhere in there. Like, there's a couple that I'm not a huge fan of, but for the most part, like, it's a solid soundtrack all the way down. It's really cool.
The bangers deliver, and, you know, a lot of them do come off of the classic Killer Instinct themes. I mean, the Instinct for one, but just delivered in, you know, 2013 and later. Just fantastic. You can learn more about Killer Instinct on episode 60 of Original Soundchat. Number 7 on the best of 2010s. Let's get 8-bit. It's Shovel Knight with music by Jake Kaufman. Shovel Knight's critical 5 tracks. We start with, of course, gotta start with Strike the Earth. Up next, we have The Vital Vitriol. Following that is Of Devious Machinations. After that, it's High Above the Land. And rounding things out for Shovel Knight is An Underlying Problem.
One of the best 8-bit aesthetic soundtracks to ever be written. Like, up there with stuff like VVV for me. It's absolutely incredible what Jake Kaufman was able to do. And I don't think it quite plays by the rules of what an NES could play, but, like, that's fine. one of the things that Shovel Knight does the best in general is it is not an NES game as they were. It is an NES game as you might remember them if you grew up with NES games. And I think that's really neat. And God, the soundtrack's so good.
It's really remarkable. And I know that there have been Shovel Knight games since, but I don't know if anything really tops the music of the original here. So many great themes. I mean, Strike the Earth to start, but then I know I love High Above the Land. Like, that will always put me in a good mood. Of Devious Machinations just gets you going with that energy. So many amazing stuff here. And I know, we both, learned of Vert and his music and through remixes on OC Remix and things like that. But then when we learned about Jake Kaufman and his career and what he's worked on and all the Shantae music and everything he's done, it's an impressive career so far. But I think Shovel Knight is tip of the top there.
Yeah, I'd agree. A close second would probably be Pirate's Curse for me. I'm glad Jake Kaufman is here. Sadly, none of the Shantae games made it to the end. I think Pirate's Curse and Half Genie Hero were both in the finals of their respective eras, but that's as close as they got, unfortunately. But I'm just glad, though not surprised, that Shovel Knight made it to the end and is here to represent Jake Kaufman's work. And you can learn more about Shovel Knight on Original Soundchat episode 37. Now let's talk about another indie soundtrack, one that is very close to my heart personally. Number 6 on the Best of 2010s. This is Celeste, with its composer, Lena Raine, still now one of my favorite composers working in the industry in general, currently. And the 5 tracks are going to start with First Steps. Moving from there, we have Resurrections. Track number 3 is Scattered and Lost. Number 4 gets a little darker with Confronting Myself. And of course, number 5, the main character of this list for me, Reach for the Summit.
A remarkable indie game to come out in 2018, Celeste. I mean, all about climbing a mountain, but having it be a representation of anxiety and depression and other struggles that we all go through. So remarkable in its symbolism and all that, but how it's also represented in the music and through different tracks like Confronting Myself. I mean, it just plays out right there. But you're right, Reach for the Summit is the cream of the crop and one of the best final level pieces I can think of. Just a culmination of everything that comes together.
Yeah, this game I hold extremely close to my heart, mostly for its themes and also, its just general feeling. It's a really, really fun game to play, even though some of the later levels make me a little salty because of how I am as a person. But yeah, Reach for the Summit is one of those songs that, like, I get really emotional when I hear it. And this game is what introduced me to Lena Raine, which is true for a lot of people, I think. And since then, like, whenever she mentions that she's been working on a game, like last year, she released 2 games. The soundtracks for 2 games being Moonglow Bay and then our number 1 for 2021 being Chicory, A Colorful Tale. And this was the start of it. And like I said, she is one of my favorite composers currently working in the industry, and Celeste's soundtrack is pretty much the biggest reason for that.
I think it's also telling from a gameplay perspective that I think the game is easy enough. As someone who has always struggled with platformers like myself, I beat Celeste. I mean, even without any of the adjustments that they allow you to make for difficulty, but I beat that game. And so like that kind of tells you it's like anyone can approach it. But then the tasks beyond, for those who are really dedicated, there is a high ceiling level there for how good do you want to be? How much do you want to try and try and try again? And through all of that, the soundtrack supports it all and the music does not get old. And I think that's probably the biggest compliment there. You can learn more about Celeste on episode 29 of Original Soundchat. Coming in at number 5 on the best of 2010s, halfway there. Well, we almost have to go back to the beginning of the countdown because number 5 is Nier Automata, with composers working on the project Keiichi Okabe, Keigo Hoashi, and Kuniyuki Takahashi. Yep, it's that other Nier game. It sure did make it onto the list. So the critical 5 for Nier Automata. We start with City Ruins Shade. After that, we have Amusement Park.
Our nation has
Following that, this is Pascal. Up next, it's Dark Colossus Kaiju. And rounding things out, it's Song of the Ancients, Atonement.
It is unbelievably telling that both Nier games are on this list.
I didn't put the original Nier on my top 10 because I didn't know what we wanted to do with do we want 2 games represented from a franchise on here? But the data and all of that sure justified putting it on there, where you put the original Nier on your list. So fair play, honestly. I was ready to, just have this one on here because Automata soundtrack is unbelievable. I really appreciate Niers and enjoy it, but every one of these tracks and more is a banger that I will never forget.
I personally still prefer the original Nier, but I did think about talking about a one per franchise rule, but this is the only one where that would have become a thing,
right?
Relevant. And both soundtracks are good enough that I think it's perfectly fine that they both ended up on here. It seems natural to me personally.
And for Song of the Ancients to make it on both, both interpretations of that song with Devil and Popola, just so good.
And you can learn more about Nier Automata. This is number 5, and you can learn more about it on Original Soundchat episode 5. Funny how that worked out. But yeah, that's an early one. But which one is even earlier? It's number 4. That is Bastion, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time in general, composed by Darren Korb and featuring performances by Ashley Barrett. Our 5 tracks are as follows for Bastion. The first one is In Case of Trouble. Second track for Bastion is Terminal March. Following that, we get a little bit more Western with Slinger's Song. Number 4 is the one I personally think is the star of the show. This is Build That Wall, Zia's theme.
Gonna build that city on a hill. Gonna build that city on a hill. Someday those tears are gonna spill. So build that wall and build it strong, 'cause we'll be there before too long. Gonna build that wall up to the sky.
Though I could definitely see an argument for number 5 being the star of the show, this is Setting Sail, Coming Home, End Theme.
Yeah, Setting Sail, Coming Home still makes a case for being one of the top 10 credit songs of all time. I will still stick with that. It's amazing to think that this was the start of Supergiant Games, and all that they've done since then makes you wonder if we ever get around to make a best of 2020s sort of collection of what a top 10 would be. It makes you wonder where Hades would fall on that best of 2020s future list, because Supergiant's just done amazing work. We still have yet to talk about Transistor on the show, and that's another amazing soundtrack. But yeah, Bastion to be the one that started it all. Every one of these songs is just so remarkable, and how it builds and folds into a story that is narrated along the way.
Yeah, I think all 4 Supergiant games have fantastic soundtracks, like absolute bangers all the way through. But for me, Bastion is still the top. I love Transistor and I love Pyre and I adore Hades all for their soundtracks, but Bastion still just has something about it that is just in there, you know? I really, really, really love the Bastion soundtrack. It's, like I said, one of my favorite soundtracks in general of all time.
The musical chemistry between Darren Korb and Ashley Barrett's voices, that's untouchable. You can learn more about Bastion. Oh, it's so close to the beginning. Episode 3 of Original Soundchat. As we move on to number 3, though, wow, I'm really glad that this made it up this high on the list. It is Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, with music by Jamie Christopherson. The critical 5 tracks for Metal Gear Rising include Rules of Nature, I don't know how you can top that. That's quite a way to start. We continue the Critical 5 with A Stranger I Remain.
I finally found what I was looking for, a place where I can be without remorse, because I am a stranger who has found an even stranger war. I finally found what I was looking for. Here I come.
Following that, it is The Stains of Time. After that, it's Red Sun. And we wrap up Metal Gear Rising's Critical 5 with It Has to Be This Way.
Standing here, I realize
still some of the best, like, music design in video games in general, with those boss themes and the lyrics coming in at pivotal moments. So good that one of my other favorite soundtracks of the decade that didn't actually make it onto the top 10 took the technology and used it for their absolute banger of a soundtrack in-game. And it's really, really cool, the sort of dynamic motion and just the hype that cutting through Mistral's attacks and then having that chorus come in at the perfect moment. It just feels so cool, and I've still yet to find a game that does it quite as well.
Yeah, it gives you shivers, like good chills for sure, when you have amazing instrumentals on these boss fights. And then you're right, when the vocal kicks in at just the right moment in the heat of battle, it takes it to a whole other level. I think it's also telling that the rest of the game, like traversing the levels as Raiden, it's okay, it's fine. Like, it's not much of a soundtrack to write home about, but it's these boss themes that everyone remembers. Like, Rules of Nature, memes aside, stands out for how good it is. When you start a game taking on a Metal Gear Ray, that's like, yep, wrap it up. One of the best first bosses ever, and just an incredible piece of music to go with it. Yeah, I'm really glad that this made it as high as it did. People often bring up Metal Gear Rising among the best soundtracks ever, and it's for tracks like these why.
Yeah, and like there's even more that didn't make it on the top 5. Like I really like Collective Consciousness. I'm My Own Master Now is really, really good. And again, both boss fight themes. So yeah, just yet to find one that just does it. I've found some that do it the same as Rising, but yet to find one that does it better. And you can learn more about Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, still one of the greatest titles ever given to a video game, in Original Soundchat episode 7. Number 2, this one actually, I don't know if this surprises me or not. I figured it would be on this top 10, like that was a given, but I didn't think it would be number 2. This is Xenoblade Chronicles, composed by Ace, Manami Kiyota, Yoko Shimomura, and Yasunori Mitsuda, which is already an all-star team in general.
Oh, yeah.
And the 5 critical tracks for this game are as follows. The first one is Main Theme. Following that, probably one of the more well-known tracks in the game. The second track is Gour Plain. Third track is Sartorial Marsh, Night. We get into some boss themes with track number 4. This is Mechanical Rhythm. And lastly, arguably the star of the show for this one, track number 5 is You Will Know Our Names.
I think this is the perfect representation to show just how much your impact as fans voting on these surveys, you pushed Xenoblade Chronicles up this high. And I think if I were personally picking just, personal choice alone, I'd probably have it around the 5-6 range.
Yeah, that's about where I'd put it too, I think.
But I think it was overwhelming support from the people who voted on these surveys, and I agree with it. I have no problem with it here. But yeah, wow, it's just a remarkable list of composers, as you mentioned, just all working to start this franchise that has only continued to have fantastic soundtracks. I mean, that was another one where, if numbers fell right a certain way, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 X could have also been in contention for the top 10. But wow, every one of these is just so good. I mean, You Will Know Our Names is a classic for a reason, even continuing in through the third game. But yeah, Mechanical Rhythm, don't sleep on that one, because that one always sticks out to me for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic soundtrack that I've still only heard in the context of either this show or Super Smash Bros. But eventually we will get to it on Smasterpieces, and I will play Xenoblade Chronicles and learn more about it and find out why Shulk sounds like that. The answer is Europe. But yeah, this soundtrack absolutely rules. Ace does a kick-ass job, and you can tell that they have just natural talent at this music thing, especially when you hear them take on other games' themes in stuff like Smash, like Gangplank Galleon, for instance. And I'm glad that they are still like a big part of the Xenoblade franchise as of this year, Xenoblade 3. Like it shows how good a job they do that they keep getting brought back, and I'm glad.
You can learn more about Xenoblade Chronicles on episode 70 of Original Soundchat.
Which is weird, because I could have sworn it was later than that.
I think we started covering the franchise with X.
That sounds right. I think.
Before we get to number 1 on the top 10, let's talk about some honorable mentions. What we did is we each picked 4 that were in that final 50 games, the 2 pools of 25, and then decided that, hey, these should at least be in the honorable mentions. So one of the games I selected comes from episode 47 of Original Soundchat, And that is Bravely Default with music by Revo. The one track I'd like to highlight from this game is Ouroboros, the serpent that devours the horizon.
Bravely Default's soundtrack is super good. I'll never play that game, but everything I hear about Bravely Default is just like, this is not the game for you. But man, that soundtrack, that's a good soundtrack.
It really is, and it's amazing to hear it live. Like, go look up Serpent Eating the Ground, because it has multiple different names to it, live, and just watch and just enjoy and appreciate it. It's so good. Also so good comes from episode 12 of Original Soundchat, and that's Cuphead with music by Christopher Madigan. The track that I'd like to highlight here is The King's Court.
Every time I think about Cuphead and his music, I just remember that it was Christopher Madigan's first time ever composing music for anything.
And he's a drummer. Like, how do you dive into jazz music that good? That's probably one of the facts that we've learned from this show that will always stick with me. And I'm floored by it. Had to at least bring Cuphead here in the honorable mentions just for that alone. And this track's a good example of how great this sounds.
Like, I gotta make sure that people understand this. When you record a podcast, the people that don't do podcasts, I don't think understand this fact. Most of the information you talk about disappears from your brain the instant the recording is done.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you want it to or not. I don't remember what we talked about last week. I just don't. It's gone. But the fact that fact, and there are a few other facts we've stumbled upon throughout this show that's just still there, especially when this happened in episode 12.
Oh, I know.
Like, it's remarkable. And this soundtrack is so good. Just so good. I'll never beat this game.
Oh, me either. Absolutely.
I mentioned earlier that there was another game that used Metal Gear Rising's sort of technology to make its own cool, dynamic soundtrack, and that soundtrack is actually another of our honorable mentions, being Devil May Cry 5, with music by Kota Suzuki, Hiromitsu Maeba, and Yoshia Terayama. We talked about this game in episode 94 of Original Soundchat, and it was actually number 1 in our Best of 2019 episode, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Which is shocking then that it is an honorable mention, but that just goes to show you how good the rest of the stuff on this list is. And of course, it's only one track we could use to highlight Devil May Cry 5. I mean, there are a billion tracks, but there's one obvious one, and that being Devil Trigger.
Of course, it had to be that one. And what a pleasant surprise that Devil May Cry 5 turned out as good as it did. I mean, from gameplay to story to music, just an all-around thrilling game.
Like, still one of my favorite games of that year, like, in general. It's absolutely fantastic. The story is great, which is really weird because Devil May Cry 3 is a pretty alright story. I don't remember a single thing that happened in 4, but 5 is genuinely really good and has like a really neat message to it. And I really like Devil May Cry 5. And the soundtrack in general is a big part of it. Subhuman not included. But
also shouts out to the QuickTime event moment in the final boss.
Yeah.
If we're talking about Devil Trigger, just mwah, chef's kiss.
All just absolutely wonderful. A close second for me, outside of Devil Trigger, probably would have been Crimson Cloud, but I mean, it had to be Devil Trigger. It had to be. That's the one.
Another honorable mention on the list. Oh, what a good soundtrack this was. Oh my goodness. From episode 99 of Original Soundchat, it's Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze with music by David Wise. So many amazing tracks to pick. I think the one for both of us that stands out, though, is Punch Bowl.
Oh, you're damn right it's Punch Bowl. Oh, man, this song rules.
You want to fight a polar bear? Yeah, you do.
Want to fight a polar bear to, like, some of the best metal that's been in a Donkey Kong game? In a Donkey Kong game. I will be real, though. As much as I really, really love this soundtrack, I am a little bit surprised that it made it into the top 50.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad it did, because it means we get to talk about Punch Bowl. Again.
It's one of those ones where, like, 2014 was like a sneaky strong year, if you really think about it. I mean, yeah, Shovel Knight and Bravely Default and Donkey Kong Country, like, very, very good year.
It is really cool that David Wise came back for the soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
To be fair, like, bringing the original dude back is, like, a great touch, and I'm very happy with how that soundtrack turned out and how that game turned out. And can I have another one, please?
Yeah, please.
You just give me another one? I've been waiting for so long. This game came out in 2014. Our next honorable mention, this is actually a recent one that has been talked about back on Original Soundchat episode 189, which I think might be the most recent on the list, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
This is, of course, The House in Fata Morgana. Speaking of games that I did not expect to get into the top 50, with music by Melakn, Gao, Yusuke Tsutsumi, Takaki Moriya, and Aikawa Razana. And the song chosen to represent it is Sisio.
Cobre as várias coisas no meu sonho, as asas estave, o pétala brilha, flor de leite bonita, e a órfã de gato, perna da lanha,
I agree. Also surprised to see it here, but you know what? That is the power of the fan vote. And also, it helps when you stump for this game very hard.
Look, I love this game, and I love its soundtrack. Like, it's fantastic, and I think a classic. It deserves a lot of attention. Yeah, I did not expect it to hit. I expected to be the only one that voted for this game in the first survey and to watch it die a death at that point, and then it just kept getting votes. So, congrats to that. A lot of, like, when I brought it up on Twitter at one point, back at the point where there was one other person that voted for it, I was like, hey, shout out to the only other human being that voted for Fata Morgana. Then, like, 3 more came in, and a couple more than that as well. And somebody on Twitter even pointed out, like, yeah, I haven't played it, but, like, you made a really good case on the episode, and it really piqued my interest, and the soundtrack is really good. I was like, oh, that feels good.
So what you're saying is there was tampering involved. No, I'm just kidding.
I have rigged these votes.
It's a good soundtrack, and it does at least belong with a shout out here for sure.
One that pains me is not on the top 10 proper.
Yeah.
But, like, again, that just shows the the fierce competition that there was. This is Journey, music by Austin Wintory. We talked about it back in original Soundchat 98. And the song that represents Journey in general, when you think of Journey, you think of Apotheosis.
I know. It's Grammy Award winning. It should have been here. It just didn't fall that way. And I think it was a combination of a couple different fronts there, but I think it just goes to show you how many amazing games there were for video game music throughout this decade.
Like, Journey is one of my favorite game soundtracks ever written, and it didn't make the top 10. I don't know, it pains me, but at least we get to bring it up here, and oh my god, it's so good. Apotheosis is such a good track.
It is life-changing if you play that game and hit that moment, and all that comes with it, and the partnership that can happen in Journey, amazing. And I think it's an easy shoe-in for honorable mentions here, despite the fact that it didn't make the top 10. Shocking.
My last honorable mention is another game that also pains me to not make the top 10, though this one I'm less surprised about than Journey. This is Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, a game with music by Masayoshi Soken and Nobuo Uematsu. Talked about it back on original Soundchat 72. And this might not be the most popular choice to be the track to represent A Realm Reborn, but for me, when I think of this game, I think about Under the Weight.
100% same. Or should I say, Titan?
It's just so... The thing that gets me every time I think about Under the Weight is when I was talking to our friend who plays Final Fantasy XIV, who has helped me put together the Critical Fives for both the original and when we did Heavensward. They told me, yeah, this is the third phase of a Titan boss fight, and that third phase lasts like 20 seconds. And I was like, what? This song is 11 minutes long. And that's a bit of a bummer to hear. I still haven't experienced it in context myself, but man, every single track on the Final Fantasy XIV soundtrack, including all of the expansions, like, absolute chef's kiss. Eventually, we will go back to it to talk about Stormblood and beyond, and I look forward to that, but I need a reason to do so first, so we'll figure that out at some point. But yeah, just, man, what a soundtrack.
I think a prime reason to do that will be when Masayoshi Soken is composing the music for Final Fantasy XVI next year. Can't wait for that.
I am very much looking forward to that soundtrack, despite the controversy currently going on about that game. But Masayoshi Soken's not part of that, so we're fine.
To wrap up the honorable mention, I decided to select Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which we talked about on episode 158 of Original Soundchat. Music by so very many people. Also understandable for it to make the honorable mentions here because such a huge soundtrack, but honestly not so many new additions. When you compare the amount of music on the soundtrack in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate to the fraction of new tracks, I think you get my point. Anyway, the track that I'd like to highlight for this is Aria of the Soul.
This track mostly ended up being there because when we did the top 10 from Smash Ultimate, this was number one for us. So I figured it was fitting, for this to be the track. Right? I mean, we already decided.
It's really a remarkable example of not only the reach of Super Smash Bros., but the amount of work that can go into a stellar cover and just remixing a song from Persona to sound so intense for battle and just amazing.
And there are so many other examples we could have used too. Like we mentioned Gangplank Galleon earlier. That could have been up there. There's so much that could have ended up on there. Because what is new in Ultimate is almost across the board entirely fantastic. I mean, as two giant Persona shills, it's not surprising that this is the one that we sort of gravitated towards.
Mm-hmm. So, beyond honorable mentions, we decided to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to allow ourselves 2 picks each of honorable mentions. And these are 2 picks for ourselves that are like games that made it outside the final 50. And we're like, how did it miss that cut? How? So I'll pick that up right here. I'm surprised that a Danganronpa soundtrack didn't make it. And so for the one for me that stands out in particular is Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. We talked about that game on episode 91 of Original Soundchat with music by Masafumi Takada. And the track that stands out from that game is Despair Searching.
Yeah, all 3 Danganronpas were eligible. 2 of them in the same year, which is probably part of the issue. Because 1 and 2 came out in America at the same time, essentially, and we used the American release dates for the list and what years things went in.
And 2017 was just an impossible year if you're talking about V3.
God, yeah. Oh boy, 2017, we got multiple tweets that were people being like, I genuinely don't know how I did this. But yeah, Danganronpa V3 is good, having finished it earlier this year.
Yeah, look at that.
When we talked about this game, I hadn't played a single Danganronpa game back then. Now I've played all 3. Huh.
How was that to go back to listen to after you had finished playing them?
I haven't had a chance to do it yet. I need to still. That is something that I need to do, just so I can hear just how hard you had to skirt around spoilers.
It was not easy. Let's just say that. Talking about skirting around spoilers, the other honorable mention for me is 2018's best soundtrack that we voted on. It was number 1 in 2018, and yet God of War did not make the top 50 for this countdown, so I had to include it here. We talked about it on our very first episode of Original Soundchat with music by Bear McCreary, and of course the track here is God of War.
Yeah, of every game that did not make the top 50, this one actually might be the most surprising to me. It was close, if I remember correctly. It was very close, but just barely did not make the cut in 2018. But like, shocking that it's not there. But yeah, at least we got to do. Some might say that this might be one of the reasons why we ended up doing the honorable mentions thing. It's a fantastic soundtrack, and yeah, it's the biggest surprise for me that of all of them that did not make it.
And honestly, of the tracks I've heard so far, God of War Ragnarok soundtrack is better. I'm just gonna say it. Get ready for that to be on the best of 2022, because that's coming.
Oh, I imagine that one's probably a shoo-in somewhere in there. Oh man, we got to start preparing for that basically right after this, huh? Oh boy.
Yeah.
My 2 honorable mentions, HHMs as we call it in the industry.
The business
that only we are part of. This one is actually kind of a surprise to me that it didn't make the top 50, though I never expected it to make the top 10, to be perfectly fair. This is one of my favorite games of all time, To the Moon. We talked about that back in Original Soundchat episode 51 with music by Kan Gao, who might be putting out another soundtrack any day now. That's weird to think about. But the track that I think represents To the Moon the best actually isn't by Kan Gao, it is by Laura Shigihara. And it is Everything's All Right.
I just stood there, searching for an answer. When this world is no more, the moon is all we'll see. I'll ask you to fly away with me until the stars all fall down. They empty from the sky, but I don't mind.
If you have not played To the Moon, you need to change that. Like, the gameplay is as simple as can be, and the story will break your heart and inspire you at the same time.
Just earlier this year, I actually got to watch one of the Hololive girls play To the Moon, being Nanashi Mume, and watching her go through all the stages of emotion that game can put you through, especially during the moon viewing scene.
Ugh.
Where she had to stop multiple times to just sort of inwardly scream at all the realizations and reveals that happen in that scene alone. Beautiful game. And then Kangao came into her chat and super chatted her. It was very nice.
Aww.
And thanked her for playing the game. And like To the Moon is one of those experiences that has not been topped for me until last year when Imposter Factory came damn close. But yeah, I agree. If you have not played To the Moon, you should play To the Moon, and also maybe keep a box of tissues handy when you do. My other honorable mention, this one I'm not super surprised about, but I still adore this game and this soundtrack. It's Yakuza 0. With music by Hidenori Shoji. We talked about this game back in original Soundchat 22. And for me, the song that I think of when I think about Yakuza, outside of Judgment, I didn't want to put Judgment here because that's not super, representative of the soundtrack as a whole. So the track that I did pick was Pledge of Demon.
I am really glad this is here because it just goes to show the strength of 2017 alone robbed this one. This is such a good soundtrack, and glad we at least got to bring it up in some capacity because Yakuza 0 and its soundtrack is the truth.
Yeah, I still think that Yakuza 0 is one of the best games ever made. In general, it's a fantastic game. Why did I pick Pledge of Demon? Look, if you're going to fight Kuze 70 times in the span of a game, and this is the song that plays during that fight, it's a song that sticks with you after a little while. There are other tracks that I could have picked, sure, but Pledge of Demon for me it's the track that I think about when I think about fights in that game. It was almost Rain. Rain was almost the one. That was a very close second. But it just came down to this one for me, personally.
You're right. It's a very, very good pick. Before we get to number 1, let's do a quick recap of the top 10 game soundtracks from the 2010s decade. Number 10, Nier. Number 9, Undertale. Number 8, Killer Instinct. Number 7, Shovel Knight. Number 6, Celeste. Number 5, Nier Automata. Number 4, Bastion. Number 3, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. And number 2, Xenoblade Chronicles. I think there is only one possible choice that number 1 can be, and if you've followed us through these 200 episodes, you would know that our pick for number 1 of the best 2010s came to us in episode 61 of Original Soundchat, and it's Persona 5. With music by Shoji Meguro, the critical 5 tracks here for Persona 5. It starts with Wake Up, Get Out There.
Oh, it's useless. Do you know? What could it mean to wake you? What does it all mean? Can we make a difference? Can we really make a difference? If we don't break out of here, wake up, get
Following that, you'll never see it coming. Its last surprise.
Here we go, don't you know? No more art. And as you look to the horizon, not a cloud, but then storming winds go too cold. Seems like it crept up out of nowhere, all around you is not what you foretold. You never see it coming. You see that my mind is too fast for eyes. You're done but the time it hit you, you're not surprised.
After that, it is Life Will Change.
So you know that we out there, swatting lines in the making. Can't move fast without breaking. Can't hold on our life for change. And our voices ring out, yeah. Took the mask off to be free. Falling out in the debris. Now we know that love will change.
Following that track, it is Rivers in the Desert.
Don't ask if I'm ready, but I'm ready to strike him down now. I just saw the new stars. There's no time for indecision. A river in a dry land. The letters in a lost head. When the hope of new beginnings burned our feet. Now we need it, a heartbeat for dreaming. Oasis in a ceaseless. Remind us what we're here for. Creating new life. Creating rivers in the desert.
And we wrap up Persona 5's Critical 5 tracks as the best game soundtrack of the 2010s with Swear to My Bones.
So just to put it in perspective, while we were putting together this top 10, before either of us even wrote our top 10s out, I went to Peter, was like, so we know what number one is, right? Like we both had the same number one, right? And lo and behold, yes, we did. Because again, we are giant Persona shills, and anybody that's been listening to us for like a year at least should know that at this point. Persona 5 is one of my favorite soundtracks ever. I know it's up there for you as well. I know you've talked about Life Will Change being like one of your favorite video game songs in general.
Yeah.
Like it's such a good soundtrack, and it's been a lot of fun because right now I am replaying Persona 5 through Persona 5 Royal because it came out on Switch, and I'm pretty far into it at this point, probably about halfway. And getting to hear all these tracks again and being reminded of like not just these 5 tracks, but there's Layer Cake and like Whims of Fate and Beneath the Mask and Arc, and there's so many good songs on this soundtrack.
And then Royal went and made it even better. Like, how? How is that possible?
Yeah, Royal added more. It's nuts. And this soundtrack is just, it's untouchable. I adore it. I adore Persona 5, even despite, like, the flaws that Royal mostly fixed for the most part. Thank God. Man, they added guns in Persona 5. Can you believe that?
Woo.
I wish they were in the original. Like, it's just such a good soundtrack.
On top of our gushing, though, it also was reflected in the fan voting, and I think that's important to bring up as well.
Yeah, Persona 5, in both surveys that it shows up in, got more votes than literally any other game on any survey. So, like, everybody else agreed this is the one.
No debates. It is settled. This is the best. And I'm really glad it's here. There are so many great game soundtracks from the 2010s, but even just going through every single track on this soundtrack, Persona 5 stands above it all to me.
So like Peter mentioned, usually during this time of year, we would do a Q&A episode just to sort of have a bit of a break from having to do research. And technically, this still gave us a break from having to do research because all the work was done last month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we figured we'd still put down a couple of questions that we've usually used every year to just sort of still have a bit of that Q&A. So why don't we get to the first question? Peter, do you want to take off with that one?
Yeah, so now that this countdown is over, how did your personal top 10s differ from the final result? I don't think we have to go necessarily, line by line, but like, what are some of the trends that like you had this game higher, this game was lower for you? What stands out when you look at your personal top 10?
For me, the main thing that stands out is I have Nier actually higher than Automata, the original, like I mentioned earlier. But not only that, Bastion is my number 2.
Yeah, wow.
So that helped bring it, like, that's the reason why it ended up at number 4. Because, I really had that ranked high. And, honestly, but to be perfectly honest, like, there's not a huge amount of variation, at least as far as I see it. Like, it generally, like, I agree with this ranking in general.
Yeah, we had a lot of the similar games selected between us. Only a couple disparities. Like, I'm glad you had Killer Instinct as high as you did, because for me, it would have been like number 11. So, like, I'm glad it made it there. For me, Bastion was number 10. So, if anything, that's kind of what held it back from being as high as it was. I was surprised that, when I kind of ranked things out kind of in my head, like, Undertale ended up at 5. And I would have expected that to be higher, but I'm glad it still made the top 10 for sure. But yeah, a lot of good games there. Xenoblade Chronicles ended up at number 2 for me as well. Just trying to kind of synthesize and put things together. I'm like, if I'm comparing it all out, yeah, that does stand above. If I'm trying to put it all together. Again, yeah, I mentioned that if it were just personal preference, yeah, it probably would end up kind of in the middle of the list, but you guys helped, and so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
And again, from minute 1, Persona 5 was number 1.
Oh, yes, yes.
From the beginning of putting this list together, after all the surveys were done, like, it was the easiest slam dunk choice we could have possibly made.
Just figuring out all the rest at that point.
One of the most interesting questions we ask ourselves every year, what has been your favorite game to talk about so far in 2022? And what is your favorite game that the other person has brought to the table?
I think it's always a fun question to ask, and we usually do it because, like, looking back on the year here in late November. But it is fun to do, and so at least let's keep it going for what is technically a Thanksgiving episode, I guess. It was fun for me to finally tackle Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I think, the history behind that game and with Michael Jackson's involvement and things like that, it was so neat to finally learn about and talk about, and of course bring those tracks to the show. I had always heard good things about Fury, but doing the research for that episode was so rewarding. And now I have several tracks that are like, oh, you can't miss with those. And it's so good to hear. And then to recognize when other people include it in things like YouTube videos, it's just that extra bit of nice touch there. And then just a couple weeks ago, you heard me talk on and on about Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I really enjoyed getting to research and talk about that game. So that was one of my favorites. As far as your games, though, the Somnium Files stands out to me, not only because it really pushed me over the edge to go and end up playing that game, not only the original 2019 game, but also its sequel, Nirvana Initiative from this year. And that was super rewarding. So I think it shows, the power of getting you interested into finally play a game and experience that. And that was a good one to go back and listen to. And it's like, yeah, you did really put together a good critical 5 there. I just wish I could have contributed a couple, cutting room floors retroactively. And then also just to hear your passion about a game like The House in Fata Morgana is always rewarding. And I think it just shows, original Soundchat at its best. When we have a real passion project and you get to really gush what you love about a game, but then also learn cool new things about it. I think that really made it stand out. And that was, I think, one of the better segments of the year.
And again, I am very proud of that in general, because people came to me and were like, that's why I voted for it in the best of 2010s. And to find out that people found it that interesting based on how I talked about it. Like, yeah, that's one of my favorite games that I brought up this year for sure. Especially considering, like, it's not every year that you play a game and then you're like, I have to talk about this right now because it's probably in my top 5 now. That doesn't happen very often. And I'm really, really psyched that people really enjoyed that. I also, really liked talking about Ghosts and Goblins. I don't know why, but that one sticks out to me as one that I had a blast researching. And just that the music in that game is just a lot of fun. But I think overall my favorite game that I've talked about so far this year is actually fairly recent, being, I think, looking into the Bag of Milk games was really neat, and a place that not a lot of other people probably would have gone. And I think it really worked out well, and it's always great when you get to contact a composer themselves and be like, hey, give me some information on this. Let me pick your brain a little bit. And again, I thank Nikita Kryakov for that. I also guess I should thank Chase Bethia for when we talked about Reality, because I got to do the same thing there. But yeah, I think those two are probably my favorite for the year, simply because of the whole, I got to reach out to somebody and ask them questions and have them be the direct source. I think that was super neat. In terms of games that you have brought this year, Fury is also on my list of games that I think were really, really interesting to learn about. I had never heard the Fury soundtrack in general. And I think that, yeah, it kind of turned me on to some songs that, damn, I've been missing these.
And composers like Danger and The Toxic Avenger.
Yeah, those coming back later for games like Haven and Road 96, I think that was a really, really interesting sort of chain of events, and Fury was the start of that. But I also think that your solo episode on Shenmue was a really, really nice listen, and I think you did a really good job with that one, especially considering it's the most boring game ever made. So, yeah, that one also stands out to me, I think.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Also got to give you your daps, because that Bag of Milk and Overwatch episode has 5 times more than our best performing episode ever on YouTube. It is far and away the best thing we've, as far as metrics and numbers and all go, the most viewed thing we've ever done for original Soundchat on that platform. So thank you.
Yeah, I find that shocking, actually. But I'm glad that it worked out, honestly. It was a fun episode to do.
One more question here. 200 episodes in, looking back, let's put it on the record. What do you think is the best episode of original Soundchat? You can only name one. What's the best one?
So whenever I think about this, my brain still goes back to 121. Matt Nui online game and Grim Fandango. I think that episode, like it being a mix of like super nostalgia on my end and then like a bona fide classic on your end. Like, I just think that episode is a powerhouse, and it is, in my opinion, like still the best one we've put out. And that's saying something because we've put out some damn good ones since then too.
I've got my choice spoiler tagged on our outline. Joe, I'm going to remove that one and show you.
Yeah!
It's 121.
Yeah!
I think, we made that choice independently of each other, and I think it shows that we have such high regard for that episode. That was a special one. I think you're right. Not only does Grim Fandango stand out as, you hear it as an all-time classic, but what makes it really tick? Oh, it's all these jazz performances done at a time before 2000 on PC, and all the history and point and click adventure games and all that. That really stands out as like a historical game for sure. But then there is something to this show of taking a game that you've maybe never heard of, and yet there's the passion and research and drive behind it, getting to contact the composer and, getting a wealth of information out of it and learning so many cool new things. I think the disparity between those two really makes it shine as like the best episode that we've done. And again, yeah, you're right. There have been so many good ones, but that's the one that stands out as, if there's one to listen to, what makes this show, it's that one, episode 121.
Absolutely. I'm so happy that we both had the same number. I hoped for that. I didn't think it was going to happen though. So I'm yeah, same hat.
Love it. It's the same shirt. It's a funny shirt. That will do it for us for this episode, this 200th episode of Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasherpieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasherpieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Podcatchers all over the globe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify. Spotify, of course, has a podcast feed with episodes, but we also have a playlist where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big monster playlist. Since we've talked about all of these games before on the show, these are all probably on Spotify, but yeah, Joe, it's a huge playlist that I commend you for keeping up to date with.
Absolutely massive. And I'm terrified of the tradition when we hit a year anniversary, which will be in a couple months, for our fourth. Oh God, our fourth. Wow. I always go look up how many hours are in that playlist now. And I'm absolutely terrified of looking at it up every year because it was already an exorbitantly long number last year, and it's going to be even longer this year, so that'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. And when you're done listening to the show, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback for us, some suggestions that you'd like to hear covered on the show as far as games and what we should talk about. Joe, who are we talking about next week as we get back to a regularly scheduled episode?
I'm going to be talking about M.R. Miller.
And I will be talking about Steve Shepkowski. To play us out, looking at some of the other games that were mentioned as possible honorable mentions, there was one song that stood out from one game that I feel like represented the decade in a way, as like a song that starts to play and you're like, yeah, it's from that game, and it represents good times and wrapping up a celebration, if you will. And I feel like what better way to represent the close of our 200th episode than to highlight Jump Up Superstar from Super Mario Odyssey.
Good choice. Very good choice.
Thank you so much for listening for all these episodes and beyond, and especially this week on Original Soundchat. we'll see you next time. Take care.
So let's all jump up super high, high up in the sky. There's no power up like dancing. You know that you're my superstar, so no one else can take me this far. I'm flipping the switch. Get ready.